Welcome to Own Your Zone podcast, where we feature venture capitalists, innovators, angels, and other investors who create positive impact globally. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm JiNan Glasgow George. I'm a patent attorney and founder of Neo IP, a law firm helping clients maximize their return on investment in patent assets. I'm also host of this show where we feature venture capitalists, private equity funds, angel investors, and other innovators. I'm happy to welcome today on my show Ryan Johns of RK Johns Consulting. But before we dive into that, let's hear a sponsorship message. This episode of Own Your Zone podcast is brought to you by Neo IP, where we help companies increase their valuation and protect their business through strategic business planning and intellectual property asset development and protection. At Neo IP, we provide corporate and legal services to help companies manage risk, develop portfolios, and monetize IP assets. We believe intellectual property is a valuable business asset with exceptional potential. Neo IP is here to protect that. Learn more about us at neoipassets.com. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today on Own Your Zone. I got an introduction to you when you were working in patent and innovation businesses, but your consulting business is essential for every innovation company. Investors want to see sales traction, and you specialize in sales process efficiency, sales culture, compensation. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in sales.
Yeah, so happy to be here. I would say my life has definitely been on an upward trajectory since meeting you. So it's been it's been amazing. It's been amazing. But as far as like my journey, I started outside sales back in 2004. Worked for a company that a lot of the listeners probably know from back in the day, Pitney Bowes, in the mailing space, right? Mailing, document management, shipping, logistics, things of that nature. And that's where I got my core. You know, I got my foundation, had some great leadership, learned great process, awesome infrastructure there. And it's just really carried me through, I'd say, the last 20 years of sales leadership, coaching, and then now getting into my own consulting practice. So something I'm really passionate about.
Very good. And, certainly you've come a long way from mailing, right? It's a digitization economy, and you're really passionate about innovation. How's the transition been?
It's been interesting. It's been exciting. Definitely not boring. But yeah, it's been really good. I think for me, sales, I look at sales differently than a lot of people, right? Sales to me is simply an exchange of value. I think some people overthink it and overcomplicate what sales is.
Okay.
It's one part exchange of value. It's another part really change management and influencing change, right? Understanding another person or another entity's value system and just aligning with that. Or if you don't align, having the courage to say, hey, we're just not a good fit. And that's okay too.
This issue of alignment, of resonance, seems like a powerful one. How do you discern that when you're working with a company?
Yeah, so it's all about clarity, right? Creating clarity. So when people, even the term value itself is a bit subjective, it's ambiguous, and it depends on who you ask, right? Everybody has their own interpretation of value. And so I think it starts there. Level setting on what value means to Ryan, right? Level setting on what value means to JiNan. And is there a way to quantify that when we're talking about sales, right? I am a firm believer that all people globally invest in whatever they care about, whatever they value, right? Yeah. So that's the key, is just, level setting there. It could be value in what they eat, value in how they're entertained, value, whatever. We all invest time, capital, and resource in what we value. And that's what it's about for me.
That makes a lot of sense. But it seems like that's different person to person, even within a company. How do you assess that, or how do you train sales teams to really understand how to communicate, to get that clarity on value?
Yeah, so it's something that I train on called elite DNA. It's discovery needs analysis. And so when it comes to sales, I always tell people the most important and critical stage in the sales process is the needs analysis. It's the discovery. It's what you learn. It's what you are able to understand, right? And unfortunately, just over, just my time in sales leadership, I'm seeing that a lot of sales reps today are uncomfortable with dialogue, right? The exchange, the two-way exchange between people, right? They're very focused on the product demonstration or showing and telling, right? They just go right into, well, we can do this and we can do that, and it solves this and it solves that. But you never slow down to take the time to understand if that even matters to me.
Oh, right. That kind of show up and throw up.
Right. Yeah. Discovery is a discipline. It's really it's a discipline for sure.
Can you give us an example of any situation where the discovery went particularly well or particularly badly?
Well, I can give you 100 of each, but when discovery goes poorly, this is what typically happens. Well, yeah, deals oftentimes they'll stall, they don't move forward, the next steps aren't clear. You will be in a situation where you have to discount your product or service very heavily, right? Because the customer has basically commoditized you at that point, right? Yeah. Because you don't understand what value is to them, and you haven't mapped your product or service to their value system, right? So that's when discovery goes really wrong. It's either indecision, heavy discounting, lag in sales process. A number of different things can throw a bottleneck in that sales process.
Is it possible to turn it around?
It's possible. I've had instances when I was an individual contributor as a seller where there were deals or there were companies that my organization was going after. They had been with a competitor for 10 plus years, right? Oh. Multiple people had come into the account trying to flip that account, trying to win that business. They weren't able to do it. Well, when I went into the account, I used the framework that I teach, the Elite DNA framework, and I was able to turn that deal in less than 9 months.
Wow.
And on two occasions. So those were like record-breaking deals. And I mean, these weren't like small accounts. These were enterprise level accounts.
Wow.
Heavy six-figure accounts, 300, 400,000 plus. Because there's a process, and I understood that I needed to align with that customer on their value metrics and show them if and how we could align with that and how we could solve that problem or accelerate their pathway to their end desired result. That's basically what I did.
Fantastic. It's great that you teach this. Your comment earlier that some salespeople today, or many salespeople today, just are uncomfortable with dialogue. I noticed that we see this in our society. We're all like, on the phone, even if we're out with, other people. What do you attribute that to, or how do you turn that around? Can you teach that dialogue, the ability to have a conversation, to build relationship, and to discern needs?
Yeah, you definitely can. It's really framework driven. Okay. I mean, there's a lot of concepts out there, a lot of methodologies out there that, there are companies that teach this type of stuff, but they don't enable the person with a framework to follow after they leave, right? Okay. So you hire this consulting firm, they come in and do, whatever their analysis is, they do their training. They could be, a month or two or whatever, but what are you enabling the rep to continue to practice that behavior?
Okay.
Because that's a behavior, right? In order to change behavior, consistency is required, repetition is required. And so do you have the ability to give them a framework that operationalizes that concept or strategy? And so that's the way you do it, because people typically don't change behavior quickly. They don't change easily. it takes 90 days, 120 days, and sometimes longer, depending on how deeply rooted the previous behaviors were.
Wow, that's great. That's great. So I love the idea of providing framework. I'm sort of recovered engineer myself, so very stage gate. I love systems. Are you providing an automated platform today, or are you developing it? Is there anything you can share about your new business?
It's top secret. No, everything we do, yeah, a lot of what we do today is customizable.
Okay.
We're working on standardization so that we can scale this faster, and we are working on a technology that will enable this change management delivery, and it actually will be industry agnostic. It'll fit any industry.
Oh, wow.
It will help a lot of, because one of the gaps that we see is that, there's a lot of churn and burn in the sales ecosystem, right? And, you bring on these new reps and they're not trained well. They don't have a foundation and they take a long time to ramp up, right? And so the framework that we're going to create, or the technology that we're going to design, will accelerate that as well. So it will give them the foundational skills on how to quantitatively align value, but it will also accelerate the ramp up time for those new hires. Because we want to design it in a way that it doesn't matter your tenure with the company or your experience. As long as you're willing to execute a process, you can do it, for sure.
Wow. It seems like this would lend itself to teaching in universities, right? I mean, to a certain degree, any entrepreneur, every entrepreneur has to sell their ideas, to sell their company, to initiate the sales process. Do you see it adapting even into a university program?
For sure. I don't see any limits, actually, because we approach it thinking about, just like I've studied behavioral psychology for years now, and just understanding how people learn, how they process and interpret information, and their ability to take that information and translate it to an outcome themselves. So this is stuff that I teach this stuff. I teach this in my own home. I teach it to my kids, and I think it's a valuable skill or insight to have, is how we as humans think and how we learn.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's definitely, people are fascinating, even in the practice of law. Certainly with inventors and entrepreneurs, we see the people factor is often the deciding factor. It's not usually the facts in the law as people think. The people determine outcomes, for sure. So as an investor myself, venture capital and angel investor, I'm interested to hear your take on the Venture Atlanta conference, I think that you attended in 2022. What was your take on the scene there? We know that in venture capital in 2021, there was more capital raised in the US than ever before. 2022 was poised to outpace that. We know there's a lot of dry powder. What was the people factor? What were you seeing at Venture Atlanta?
Yeah, being a little bit newer to the VC space, again, I don't have a lot to compare to, right? My experience there, it seems though that there's a shift happening. There's a recalibration going on. People are starting to think about business just in general a little bit differently, right? And starting to be more qualitatively focused more than quantitatively focused, which I think is a good thing, because you start looking beneath the hood a little bit. And they actually had a session that was focused on the people factor, on culture, and on organizational health and things like that. So I was really, really encouraged to hear that was a highlight of that conference. So it was pretty awesome. And I think people are getting to the place where it's like, you know what? Is the status quo acceptable? Like, do we have to continue to do business like we used to? Do we have to continue to be satisfied with 75% of our portfolio companies failing? Does that have to be the status quo? Does it have to be the standard? And so I always tell people, change is whatever you want it to be. You decide.
It goes back to those values you were talking about earlier, being consistent with the values, for sure. Fascinating. There are always technology and innovation companies lingering around venture conferences. Anything strike your fancy? Something that impressed you on the tech and innovation side there recently?
Nothing that stands out.
Okay.
Nothing that stands out. There's
Okay.
so much out there, right?
Yeah.
And there's still so much there's just a lot to digest and process. Like, man, what's happening? I mean, I think holistically, when you think about your Web3, your metaverse, and things like that, I mean, that's always intriguing.
Yeah.
And I remember, listening to some of the talks at your conference, and it was like, geez, this is like over my head. So it's learning for me. You know what I mean? It's all fascinating to me.
Yeah, our 9th annual Eclipse IP Futures Conference here in Raleigh, North Carolina was really special this year. We had such amazing guests from Silvina Moschini of the Unicorn Hunters to Andre Swanston and his $9 to 9-figure exit. Some really great technology presented as well. And do you have thoughts on the metaverse and sales? There are a lot of companies positioning the metaverse as a space for virtual training. Do you think that's going to be effective or not? Do you have a call on that?
Oh, that's a tough one, right? Because my focus right now is more on humanizing sales. I think
Okay.
in the sales space, we've gotten overly techy, that we've forgotten the human element. We've forgotten how to relate. We've forgotten how to listen and be empathetic. And you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I think there needs to be a balance. That's all I'm saying. I think there's definitely value, but we just can't, lean in too far one way or the other. And I think that's what's missing, is the balance.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's no substituting people with robots for sales. I think you have to have that dialogue and that engagement. Speaking of that engagement, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that you have the best voice since James Earl Jones.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I hear it. I hear it often. I don't know what to do with it, but I'm thankful for it, I guess. Maybe you can help me with that one.
Yeah, maybe a future role in Star Wars, Darth Vader voiceover or something. That's
I'm
great.
for it. I'm all for it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, do you have anything else that you can share with us that perhaps would stimulate our listeners to dive deeper into sales? What's the first thing they can do to get into a better sales culture?
Oh, man. Well, so when I look at sales culture, I think there are 4 pillars to a successful sales culture, right? And so if companies can start deeper diving and analyzing their sales process, that's one. Dig deeper into their sales technology, because there's a lot of technology and automation that companies are acquiring that they're just not getting an ROI. It's not even aligned to their use case, right? They're just kind of listening to, some anecdotal data from a company that doesn't even fit their space, and they're just like, oh, this will automate things, this will accelerate. Like, no, not necessarily. If you don't have a good baseline and good foundational practices, you're going to just accelerate dysfunction, right? And sometimes it becomes the technology becomes a distraction or deterrent. The third layer is sales talent, right? I see a lot of companies that are promoting, individual contributors that are high performing to sales leadership. They don't really correlate. I mean, the behaviors of a good salesperson and a good sales leader are not the same. They're very, very different. And I talk about it. Actually, I published my first book a couple of years ago. It's called The Leader Shift Toward Functional Know-How. And it's up on, it's a company, BookBoon is the publisher, BookBoon, out of the UK. I think they're the #1 ebook publisher in the world.
Okay.
And it's up on my LinkedIn. Like, folks can find me on LinkedIn. It's up there. But I think there's a lot of insight there around sales leadership, around talent alignment, talent optimization, organizational health that companies are just not thinking about.
Yeah. Oh, good. And
then the final piece is compensation. Like, compensation is like the last piece, but those are the 4 pillars, right? Sales process, sales technology, sales talent optimization, and compensation, sales compensation optimization.
Very good. For some of the entrepreneurs in our audience, you can start from scratch. At some point you do. All big things start small. What advice do you have for someone building a new sales team?
Yes, infrastructure is the most important thing, right? Having even if it's a light skeleton, and having someone with the expertise that knows what good should look like,
Okay.
just give you a second opinion, right? Don't be afraid of second opinions. Don't be afraid of outside counsel. But infrastructure is the key. If you have poor infrastructure and you start hiring a bunch of people and adding a whole bunch of, technology, then again, you're going to compound dysfunction. It's like building a house on sand, right? It's not, you got to start with the foundation. Has to be the foundation.
Very good. Very good. I remember an early sales hire mistake that I made in a prior software company, and that was not finding out the values, if you will, of that person and their buying and selling habits, if you will, personally.
Yes.
I learned that you can't expect someone to sell something at a high level, if you will, to them. In this case, it was per unit about $15,000 to $25,000. And I didn't realize until a few months later that he felt like it was against his morality to expect someone to make that buying decision without at least 4 to 6 months of data analysis, et cetera. Whereas, as you may or may not know, in patent law, that's a patent application. People decide that instantly every day. And so you can't expect someone to go against their own values. And it seems like a good question to ask. What's one question you would ask of a new sales hire?
One question I would ask about just an individual contributor.
Yeah, just to judge if they would be a good fit for your team.
Yeah, I would ask something along the lines of just understanding their intrinsic motivation. That's the biggest piece. The biggest piece for me is intrinsic motivation. Like, so there's something called the motive spectrum in psychology, right? And it talks about the 3 top intrinsic motivators and then 3 external, and actually compensation is one of the external on the lower end of the spectrum. So I just want to understand what drives them, right? What drives their behavior, what fuels them, what's their why.
Okay.
That's a big one.
Very good.
If that why correlates with the role or there's some sort of close correlation, 9 times out of 10, that person's going to do very well in that job.
Great. That's good advice for us. So Ryan, you're available on LinkedIn, Ryan K. Johns, and it's RK Johns Consulting. How else can people find you if they wanted to reach out for more?
Yeah, super easy. So LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'm very active on LinkedIn daily. The website is rkjohnsconsulting.com, or they can actually find me also at centralmetric.com. So going through a merger right now with another consulting firm. So yeah, but LinkedIn is probably the best way, the fastest way for sure.
Perfect. That sounds great. Well, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining us on Own Your Zone. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Own Your Zone podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.